The arena was trembling, not from an earthquake, not from thunder, but from 50,000 voices colliding into one unstoppable roar. It was a sound that rattled rib cages, made the floor vibrate beneath shoes, and rose so high it seemed to challenge the very lights fixed in the rafters. The walls of the stadium strained under the weight of it, a living, breathing tidal wave of sound created by human anticipation. And at the very center of it all stood Michael Jackson. The spotlight pinned him in place like the world's most brilliant jewel. His silhouette was iconic before he even moved. The fedora dipped low, shadowing his eyes, the sequined jacket scattering shards of silver into the smoky air, the single white glove glittering like a star unto itself. His stillness was unbearable to the audience, because they knew what came next. The first beat dropped, and the stadium exploded. Billie Jean is not my lover. Michael's voice soared through the speakers, sharp, flawless, electrifying. The bass line thumped like the pulse of the arena itself, each note digging into the bones of the crowd. He slid across the stage in that impossible glide, his moonwalk so smooth it looked like time itself bent under his command. People screamed as though gravity had been defied right before their eyes. Rows of blinding white light slashed across the darkness, illuminating waves of faces, young, old, rich, poor, united by one thing, the collective surrender to the music. Hands reached upward like a field of desperate signals, each one hoping to touch something larger than life. In the sea of sweat, tears, and shrieks, strangers clutched each other like old friends, bonded by the electricity that only Michael Jackson could conjure. The air itself smelled of heat, of sweat, of stage smoke, of the faint ozone tang of electricity from the lights and sound. And yet no one noticed the discomfort. They were transfixed. The man on stage wasn't merely singing. He was summoning something primal. Each flick of his wrist, each pop of his shoulder, each lean that seemed to defy human anatomy made 50,000 people gasp as one. Security guards lined the pit, their eyes sharp and their stances rigid, because they knew Michael's concerts carried a dangerous magic. Fans fainted in their seats. Others tried to claw forward, desperate to breach the divide between mere mortal and legend. Doctors, nurses, and paramedics lurked in the wings, ready to carry out those who could no longer withstand the tidal wave of emotion. And yet Michael thrived in that storm. He strutted to the far edge of the stage, one hand gripping the microphone stand, the other extended toward the audience like a promise. Screams rose and fell with the simple motion of his fingers. He had them in his palm, literally and figuratively. Each note of his voice hit with surgical precision, weaving seamlessly with the pounding rhythm of his band. The giant screens flanking the stage magnified him, but nobody looked at the screens. Their eyes were fixed on the real thing, breathing, moving, shimmering under the glow. The arena was a cathedral, and Michael was both preacher and prophet. People always told me, be careful what you do. Every lyric was met with an answering cry, a call and response so thunderous that the song became a collaboration between star and masses. Cameras flashed like lightning bolts across the audience, a strobing constellation, recording history in real time. Backstage, crew members whispered to each other in disbelief. Even after countless nights of this spectacle, even after rehearsals and technical checks, the raw power of Michael's command stunned them. It was the kind of energy you couldn't rehearse, couldn't bottle, couldn't manufacture. It existed only in the collision of the moment. The music, the man, and the audience locked together in one suspended eternity. Then, without warning, Michael stopped. Mid-step, mid-glide, mid-breath, he froze. His body stiffened, his fedora shadowing his face as the lights dimmed to a single spotlight. Silence, sudden and sharp, cut through the roar. It wasn't the silence of a dead crowd. It was the silence of 50,000 people holding their breath, waiting to see what came next. Michael tilted his head slowly, like a predator scenting the air. He crouched low, spun, then snapped back upright with a gesture so sharp it felt like a gunshot had gone off. The crowd detonated. The music surged again, bigger, louder, faster. The stage lit up in golden fire, bursts of light punctuating every beat. Pyrotechnics flared along the stage edges, but the audience barely registered the explosions. Michael was the fire, the light, the spectacle. Everything else was decoration. In the front rows, teenagers sobbed openly, clutching their friends as if this was the only night that mattered. Parents who had grown up with Jackson 5 records found themselves screaming like children. Strangers exchanged wide-eyed looks that seemed to say, "We will never forget this moment." Michael twirled, body snapping into positions that blended dance with sculpture, each movement sharp enough to carve into memory. His shadow stretched long across the glowing stage, larger than life, a reminder that this wasn't just a concert. It was a myth being written in real time. He paused again, his chest heaving, sweat glistening across his forehead. He brought the mic close, whispering a single word, "E." And 50,000 people erupted as if the word alone had been worth the price of admission. At that moment, the stadium no longer felt like steel and concrete. It felt alive, like a single living creature with 50,000 hearts beating as one. Michael Jackson stood at its core untouchable. But in the shadows, just beyond the ring of security, fate was preparing to test that perfection. A restless ripple moved through the crowd, a subtle shift that even Michael's hypnotic control couldn't suppress. Security guards leaned into their earpieces, eyes darting. A figure pressed forward, closer, closer, fueled by adrenaline and desperation. The arena trembled still, but this time, the tremor carried the faint warning of an approaching quake. What was about to happen would tear through the smooth surface of night, shattering the barrier between fan and legend, order and chaos. And Michael, whether ready or not, was about to face it head-on. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe to support the channel. The music was thunder. The band hit the chorus of Billie Jean with precision, so sharp it felt mechanical, yet alive. Michael spun, dropped his knees, and the audience screamed like it was the last sound they would ever make. Cameras flashed in chaotic rhythm, trying to capture the uncatchable. But then, something shifted. It started small, unnoticed. A ripple at the edge of the floor section. Security guards stiffened, their hands pressed to earpieces, their eyes narrowing. At first it looked like nothing more than a fan pushing too hard against the barricade. It happened at every show. People fainted. People surged forward. The guards were trained for that. But this was different. From the corner of his eye, Michael saw it, a figure breaking free of the crowd. Young, fast, reckless. The barrier buckled as the fan vaulted over, arms flailing, adrenaline propelling them like a bullet fired from the audience itself. Gasps cut through the screams. Some people thought it was part of the show. Others screamed in warning. Security swarmed, but the fan was already sprinting across the pit, dodging the desperate grabs of guards in black jackets. And then, before anyone could stop it, the fan lunged onto the stage. It happened in a blur, a flash of sweat-soaked hair, the shine of a jacket sleeve, a streak of wild eyes. The figure tumbled forward, caught themselves on trembling hands, then scrambled upright. In their hand was something that should have been impossible. The microphone, one of the spares that had been resting on the edge of the stage, snatched in the chaos. The fan clutched it like a lifeline, their chests heaving, their bodies shaking under the glare of 1,000 spotlights. The music faltered. The band looked around, instruments still humming in confusion. The drummer hesitated, sticks hovering midair. The bass player dropped into silence. One by one, the sounds that filled the arena began to collapse, like a building losing its supports. The audience roared, half in excitement, half in fear. It was a sound unlike anything the stadium had produced that night. Some people screamed encouragement, "Sing, sing," while others shouted warnings, "Get him off," "Security." Cameras whirred and clicked in a frenzy, capturing the moment that had already become history. The fan lifted the microphone, knuckles white around the handle. Their voice cracked out of speakers, trembling, breathless. Michael. Just that one word. A cry, a plea, a confession. The sound echoed through the arena, distorted but deafening. 50,000 people inhaled all at once, as though the air itself had been stolen. Security reached the stage at last, sprinting, ready to tackle, ready to drag the intruder into shadows. But then something happened that froze them in their tracks. Michael raised his hand, one single gloved hand, lifted slowly, commanding silence, not just from security, but from everyone. The guard skidded to a halt. The band stared. The fan trembled, staring at the man they had worshipped from afar, now only a breath away. The moment stretched. Michael took a step forward. The crowd erupted again, not in screams, but in chaotic disbelief. Nobody could have predicted this. The king of pop, untouchable, iconic, mythic, was walking toward a fan who had just hijacked the stage. The fan's chest rose and fell like a drumbeat. Tears streaked their face, glittering in the lights. They raised the microphone again, their voice cracking through the speakers. I love you." The words were raw, unpolished, desperate. They carried across the arena like lightning splitting the night sky. And then the fan's voice broke entirely, swallowed by sobs. Their knees buckled, the weight of the moment crushing them. The audience was split in two, half horrified, half awed. Some shouted for security to act. Others begged the fan to be allowed to stay. Cameras flashed faster, capturing a spectacle that seemed too surreal to be real. Michael stopped just a few feet away. His expression was unreadable under the brim of his fedora. His chest rose with measured breaths, his entire body radiating calm control. He looked at the fan, then at the microphone trembling in their hands. And he smiled. Not a big grin, not mockery, just the smallest curve of his lips. Enough to melt the ice of fear, enough to turn the arena's panic into something softer. The fan let out a choked cry, clutching the microphone tighter, their whole body shaking. The arena buzzed with restless energy, waiting for the explosion, for the anger, the chaos, the end of the show. Instead, Michael reached out his hand. The glove shimmered in the spotlight, suspended in the air like an offering, like a bridge between two worlds. The fan froze, unsure whether to take it. Security shifted, restless, waiting for command. The band sat poised, instruments ready to surge back into music at the slightest signal. The crowd leaned forward. 50,000 bodies balanced on the edge of the same cliff. The fan finally lifted their trembling hand, placing it against Michael's. The arena erupted. It wasn't just cheers. It was a collective scream of release, of disbelief, of relief. The sound punched into the night with the force of a tidal wave. Strangers hugged. People sobbed. Hands shot into the air. For one suspended moment, the fan was no longer an intruder. They were part of the show. Michael gently lowered the microphone back toward himself, his touch guiding rather than grabbing. But before he spoke, before he reclaimed the night, he looked into the fan's tear-streaked eyes. And he nodded. The message was clear. You're safe. You're heard. You matter. The fan collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed, clutching their chests as security finally approached. But this time they didn't drag. They didn't tackle. They moved carefully, respectfully, as if they too had been transformed by that simple gesture. The music had stopped. The choreography was broken. The perfection of the show was shattered. But in that imperfection, something else had been born. The crowd felt it. The band felt it. Even the fan being gently led away felt it. Michael had taken chaos, danger, disruption, and turned it into connection. The night was no longer about flawless performance. It was about something deeper, something raw, something no ticket, no recording, no rehearsal could ever promise. And as Michael slowly raised a microphone to his lips once more, the arena braced itself. Nobody knew what he would say, but everyone knew whatever came next would change the night forever. The arena had gone silent in a way no engineer could ever design. It wasn't the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of 50,000 people holding their breath, waiting for a verdict. The fan had been escorted gently to the edge of the stage. Still trembling, their face streaked with tears. Security hovered, unsure if they should remove them entirely or pause for Michael's cue. And Michael hadn't moved. He stood still under the spotlight, the microphone in his hand, the brim of his fedora shadowing his eyes. Sweat glistened across his cheekbones, catching the light like molten gold. The glove on his right hand flexed slowly, a metronome ticking in the absence of music. The audience's hearts pounded in sync, desperate for sound, for direction, for release. Then, with the smallest tilt of his head, Michael brought the microphone close to his lips. The first sound wasn't a word. It was a soft chuckle, not mocking, not cruel, just a breath of laughter that broke the tension, like a pin through glass. The crowd responded instantly, erupting into relieved cheers and applause. People screamed his name, fists pumped the air. Strangers grabbed one another in giddy disbelief. He wasn't angry. He wasn't ending the show. Michael lifted his eyes, fixing them on the trembling fan still kneeling near the side of the stage. "You really want to be heard, huh?" The words rippled across the arena, carried by the speakers, bouncing off concrete and steel, echoing into every ear. The fans sobbed harder, nodding furiously. Michael turned back to the crowd, gesturing wide with his free hand. Now everybody knows their name. Laughter thundered through the stands. The audience roared, half in amusement, half in admiration. The moment of fear had transformed into a moment of comedy, of connection. Michael hadn't scolded, hadn't lashed out. He'd folded the disruption into the story of the night. He paced slowly to the edge of the stage where the fans sat on their knees, overwhelmed and shaking. Instead of keeping distance, Michael crouched down so that they were nearly eye level. Thousands of cameras fired in a frenzy, capturing what seemed impossible. The king of pop kneeling before a fan who had hijacked his stage. Michael spoke softly, but the microphone carried every word. "You see all these people?" He gestured behind him to the endless sea of faces. "They came for love, and you wanted to share yours. I hear you. We all hear you." The crowd roared again, this time not with laughter, but with something deeper. Applause rumbled like thunder. People stood in their seats, tears glistening in the light. It wasn't just a spectacle anymore. It was raw humanity playing out before their eyes. The fan reached trembling hands toward him, desperate to hold on to the moment. Security braced, but Michael extended his gloved hand once more, steady, deliberate. The fan grasped it like a lifeline, sobbing openly. Michael squeezed gently, then rose back to his full height. His fedora dipped low, his shoulders squared. The lights caught the sequins of his jacket, scattering stars across the smoke-filled air. He turned toward the band. "Let's start again," he said simply. The band, still stunned, scrambled back into formation. The drummer's sticks clicked together. The bassist nodded. The guitar's fingers hovered, waiting. But instead of restarting Billie Jean, Michael raised a microphone high above his head. "This time," he said, "we're all going to sing together." The arena erupted in a scream so loud it rattled the steel beams overhead. The first chord demand in the mirror poured out, soft and steady. The song wasn't scheduled for that moment in the set, but it didn't matter. The message was perfect. Michael's voice cut through the quiet intro, rich and haunting. "I'm going to make a change for once in my life." The crowd went wild, but he lifted a hand, calling for silence. He wanted them to hear it, to feel it. The band softened, letting his voice stand alone, naked and unshakable. "It's going to feel real good, going to make a difference." The fan who had grabbed the mic still knelt at the side of the stage, watching through a haze of tears. Their chest heaved with sobs, their face lifted in awe. Michael gestured toward them with a small nod, as if to say, "This is for you." By the time the chorus hit, Michael dropped the microphone slightly, urging the crowd with a sweeping gesture of his arm. "If you want to make the world a better place." 50,000 voices rose like a choir. "Take a look at yourself and make a change." The sound shook the arena to its foundation. It wasn't just singing, it was release. The fear, the tension, the chaos a moment ago had been transfigured into unity, into power. People wept openly as they sang, their voices raw but full of conviction. The fans' trembling lips moved with the words, barely able to form the syllables, but they were part of it. Michael danced through the chorus, fluid, unhurried, feeding off the collective energy. Every spin, every lean, every kick hit harder than rehearsed choreography ever could. He was no longer performing at the audience. He was performing with them. By the second chorus, the arena had become a single body, 50,000 voices and Michael's soaring falsetto weaving together in perfect, chaotic harmony. Security, once rigid and alert, now stood slack-jawed, swaying with the crowd. Even the stagehands backstage, usually invisible, were pressed against the walls, singing every word. The moment wasn't perfect. The fans' intrusion had derailed the show, broken the set list, thrown everything off balance. But Michael's reaction had turned it into something untouchable. The fans' desperate act to be heard had become the catalyst for the most human, most unforgettable performance of the night. And Michael, instead of punishing, had elevated it into history. As the final chorus thundered, Michael lifted his hands high above his head, conducting the voices of thousands like a choir. The fans' sobs were drowned in the tidal wave of sound, but in that flood, they found redemption. They weren't an intruder anymore. They were part of the night. Michael's voice cracked one final note into the rafters, then dropped to a whisper. Make that change. The band cut out. The lights dimmed. For a heartbeat, the arena was still. Then it exploded. Screams. Applause. Tears. People stomping, clapping, roaring so loud it felt like the earth itself would split. The energy was no longer about spectacle. It was about survival, unity, something deeper than entertainment. Michael stood center stage, chest heaving, drenched in sweat, smiling faintly. He tipped his fedora toward the fan, who was finally led away, not in disgrace, but in awe, their body trembling, their eyes wide with disbelief. The audience would never forget what they had witnessed. And Michael knew it too. What had started as chaos had become transformation. And the night wasn't even over. The eruption of applause still echoed in the rafters when Michael lifted the microphone again, his chest heaving, his gloves sparkling under the lights. The arena was his completely, yet not in the usual way. It wasn't the slick perfection of rehearsed choreography or the flawless timing of a show engineered down to the millisecond. This was raw, unscripted, alive, and the audience knew it. They weren't watching a performance anymore. They were part of a once-in-a-lifetime event. Michael let the crowd cheer until the sound became a wave, rolling through the stadium in endless crests. Then, with a sudden snap of his wrist, he silenced them. The gesture alone was enough. His control over 50,000 people absolute. He tilted his head, speaking softly into the microphone. You feel that? The audience roared in answer. Michael nodded slowly, his eyes sweeping across the sea of faces, scanning the balconies, the far-off shadows. That's love. That's why we're here. The screams intensified, but now they were different, less hysteria, more reverence. People clutched their hearts. Strangers hugged. The fan who had been escorted away stood at the wings, tears still wet, unable to believe they had sparked this. Michael turned back to the band, flashing a grin that was half command, half mischief. Let's give them something special. The drummer hit the snare. The bassist plucked a deep groove. The guitarist's fingers danced across strings. But instead of slipping back into the scripted set list, Michael launched into Shake Your Body, Down to the Ground, a song not scheduled for that night. The audience went ballistic. Michael's energy was explosive. He leapt, spun, stomped, his movements sharper than ever, his joy radiating in waves. But then, halfway through the first chorus, he did something unheard of. He lowered the mic and turned it toward the audience. Don't stop till you get enough. 50,000 voices shouted it back at him, perfectly in rhythm. He grinned, spun on his heel, and pointed to another section of the arena. Don't stop. The response thundered from the upper balconies. He turned again, pointing to the far left of the stadium. Don't stop. The walls shook with the reply. Michael had turned the stadium into a massive call and response, a gospel revival disguised as a pop concert. He conducted with his arms, his spins, his pointed glove. The audience was no longer spectators. They were the band, the choir, the show. Backstage, crew members stared wide-eyed at the monitors. This wasn't in the plan. This wasn't on the set list. But nobody dared intervene. They knew instinctively they were watching history. Michael pulled the band into silence with a sharp cut of his hand. The arena stilled, anticipation vibrating in the air. Then, with a sly smile, he whispered into the mic, "Let's try something quieter." The opening chord to Human Nature floated out, soft as silk. The lights dimmed to a starry glow. Tiny points scattered across the black rafters like a night sky. Michael stepped forward, his voice hushed but soaring. "If they say, why, tell them that it's human nature." The audience melted. Couples clung to each other. swaying. Parents lifted children onto their shoulders, tears streaking their cheeks. Even security guards, still tense from the earlier disruption, found themselves humming along. Michael's voice cracked with emotion, not from exhaustion but from sincerity. Every note carried weight, not just performance. He leaned into the vulnerability, stretching syllables until the crowd hung on them like lifelines. At the end of the song, he dropped to his knees at the edge of the stage, reaching out toward the fans in the front row. Dozens of hands reached back, trembling, desperate. He brushed a few fingertips, the contact fleeting, but enough to send them collapsing in sobs. Then he did the unthinkable. He pulled a young girl from the front row onto the stage. Security moved to stop it, but Michael waved them back. The girl, no older than 10, shook with fear and joy, clutching a worn poster of him to her chest. Michael knelt beside her, whispering into the microphone so the whole arena could hear. "What's your name?" Her voice trembled, barely audible. "Sarah." Michael smiled. "Everybody say hi to Sarah." The arena roared her name. The girl's eyes widened in disbelief as 50,000 people shouted her into legend. Michael took the poster from her hands, held it up, and kissed it before giving it back. Then he stood, taking her hand in his and gently leading her back to the edge of the stage. The girl stumbled off, collapsing into her parents' arms, her entire world forever changed. Michael turned back to the audience, his voice dropping into a whisper. "This is our night." The band crashed in to beat it. Flames shot skyward from the stage edges. But even as the spectacle returned, the tone was different now. The earlier disruption had cracked open the polished veneer of the show, revealing something raw and alive beneath it. Michael fed on that energy, improvising spins, extending choruses, laughing into the microphone between verses. At one point, he stopped mid-song, holding a single high note until the crowd was shrieking, then abruptly cut the music and shouted, "Sing it yourselves." The band dropped out completely, and 50,000 people carried Beat It without instruments, without guidance, their voices filling the arena in ragged, glorious harmony. Michael moonwalked across the silent stage, grinning, conducting the choir of humanity with nothing but his presence. The transformation was complete. What had begun as a disruption, chaos, fear, tension, had become the heartbeat of the night. The set list no longer mattered. The rules no longer applied. The show had crossed into legend, reshaped by the unexpected and defined by Michael's refusal to lose control. The crew backstage exchanged stunned glances. One of the band members whispered, "We're not playing a concert anymore. We're witnessing a miracle." By the time the final chorus of Beat It ended, the audience wasn't just watching Michael Jackson. They were part of him, woven into his performance, their voices inseparable from his. Michael stood center stage, chest heaving, sweat dripping from his hair. He gazed at the roaring masses, eyes wide with something like awe. For all his years of rehearsals, tours, and shows, he knew this night was different. This wasn't just music. It was communion. The arena still shook with the echoes of Beat It. The last note stretched into the rafters like it had no intention of leaving. 50,000 people stood on their feet, hands raw from clapping, voices shredded from screaming, but no one cared. They weren't tired. They weren't ready to leave. They were suspended in something bigger than themselves, something that felt like history being written in real time. And Michael knew it. He stood center stage, chest rising and falling. His sequin jacket plastered him with sweat, his fedora tipped low. The white glove on his hand trembled slightly as he raised the microphone back to his lips. He could have ended the show right then, and no one would have complained. He could have walked off and left the audience stunned, and it still would have gone down as one of the greatest nights of his career. But Michael Jackson wasn't finished. He tilted his head, scanning the crowd with deliberate slowness. Every section, every balcony, every shadow. His gaze swept over the masses like a searchlight. The arena responded by chanting his name. 50,000 voices uniting in 3 perfect syllables. Michigan-ile, Michigan-ile, Michigan-ile. The chant rattled the steel beams overhead. Michael let it roll, his smile growing just slightly. Then, in a voice that was hoarse but powerful, he spoke into the microphone. "This night belongs to all of you." The crowd erupted. Michael raised his hand again, silencing them with the authority of conductor quieting an orchestra. He gestured to the band, and the first soft piano notes of Heal the World floated into the air. Gasps rippled through the stadium. Some fans pressed their hands to their mouths. Others immediately began to cry. The song wasn't supposed to be in the set list, not that night, not at that moment. But after everything that had happened, the chaos, the fan, the unity, it was the only song that made sense. Michael's voice entered soft as prayer. There's a place in your heart, and I know that it is love. The crowd swayed like an ocean, tens of thousands of arms raised, moving together as if they'd rehearsed it all their lives. The lights dimmed, and then, one by one, tiny specks of light flickered to life. Fans lifted lighters, phones, glow sticks. Soon the arena glowed like a galaxy, stars suspended in a man-made sky. Michael's voice trembled with emotion. He wasn't just singing the words. He was pleading with them, offering them up like a gift. When the chorus came, he dropped his voice and let the crowd carry it. Heal the world, make it a better place. 50,000 voices soared. The sound was imperfect, ragged, but it was magnificent. Michael closed his eyes, listening, letting himself be swept up in the sound of humanity singing back at him. For a moment, he wasn't the king of pop. He was a man, standing in awe of the very people who had come to see him. The fan who had grabbed the microphone earlier was still at the side of the stage, tears running freely. Security no longer pushed them away. They stood, one hand over their heart, singing with the rest of the crowd. Michael glanced at them once, nodded, then turned back to the masses. By the time the song ended, the arena was drenched in emotion. People held each other, strangers wiping tears from one another's cheeks. It felt less like a concert and more like a global prayer. Michael stood still for a long moment, microphone lowered, breathing heavily. Then, with a slow motion, he raised his glove into the air. The crowd responded with a roar so thunderous it nearly broke the roof. "Thank you," he whispered into the microphone. The words were simple, but they cut through the noise, amplified by sincerity. "This night, I'll never forget." He tipped his fedora forward, bent into a deep bow, and for a moment, the spotlight made him look almost fragile, small against the endless sea of faces. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he straightened, moonwalked across the stage one last time, and struck his iconic pose. Legs crossed, body tilted, one arm raised high. The arena exploded. Confetti cannons erupted from the stage edges, showering the crowd in glittering rain. Pyrotechnics roared, fire shooting skyward in golden arcs. The final notes of music swelled, then crashed to silence. And then it was over. The lights cut out. The stage went dark. But the roar of the audience didn't fade. It carried on long after Michael disappeared backstage, echoing through the concrete hallways, spilling into the streets outside. People staggered out of the stadium dazed, their voices hoarse, their faces streaked with sweat and tears. Strangers hugged in the parking lots. Taxi drivers swore they'd never heard anything like it. Reporters scribbled furiously, trying to capture what they'd just seen. Backstage, the crew stood in stunned silence. The band members exchanged glances that said what none of them could quite put into words. This hadn't been a concert. This had been something else. Something bigger. Michael sat quietly in his dressing room, a towel draped around his shoulders, his chest still heaving. For once, he wasn't talking, wasn't giving instructions. He just sat, staring at the floor, replaying the night in his mind. The image of the fan, trembling with a microphone in hand. The roar of the crowd as they sang together. The lights in the audience, flickering like stars. He whispered to himself, almost too softly to hear. Magic. Word of what had happened spread like wildfire. By the next morning, headlines screamed about the night the fan stole the mic, and Michael turns chaos into history. Bootleg recordings surfaced. Shaky footage showing the moment of the fan's intrusion and Michael's unbelievable response. Clips aired on television around the world, sparking debates, admiration, and disbelief. Critics who had dismissed his concerts as overproduced spectacles admitted they'd never seen anything like it. Music journalists called it a masterclass in grace under fire. Fans who had been there claimed no recording, no article, No retelling could ever capture the electricity of that night. They were right, because you had to be there. You had to feel the silence when the fan first grabbed the microphone. You had to hear the laughter that followed Michael's calm words. You had to stand in that ocean of voices, singing Man in the Mirror, and heal the world as if your life depended on it. It was a night when perfection shattered, and something far more powerful emerged. In the years to come, people would tell and retell the story of that night. Some details would blur, some would be exaggerated, but the core truth remained. A fan broke the rules, chaos threatened to end it all, and Michael Jackson turned it into magic. It became legend. A night not remembered for flawless choreography or pristine sound, but for the moment when a superstar reminded the world that music isn't about control. It's about connection. And for everyone in that arena, from the trembling fan to the strangers in the farthest row, they knew they had been part of something that would never happen again. The night a random fan grabbed the mic, and Michael Jackson's reaction changed everything. Forever. If you like this story, please subscribe to support this channel.